Good evening and welcome to the Tuesday, July 5th, 2016 meeting of the Lake Forest City Council. Could I ask the clerk to call the roll, please?
Certainly. Honorable Mayor Schoenheider.
Here.
Alderman Waldeck.
Here.
Alderman Feisler.
Here.
Alderman Pandeleon.
Here.
Alderman Newman.
Here.
Alderman Tack.
Here.
Alderman Reisner.
Here.
Alderman Edelman.
Here.
Alderman Moreno.
Here.
Mr. Mayor, you have a quorum.
Thank you very much, Biddy. Would you join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, please? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good evening. First item on the agenda this evening, reports of city officers. Under that, comments by mayor. I have two things. First of all, I want to congratulate and thank everyone from the Friends of the Park and Rec Foundation last night on a terrific event. There's an enormous amount of work that goes into that. It came off without a hitch. It was a great evening. The weather cooperated, fortunately. But it was a great night, and I think it really showcased our community very well. I think it showcased, too, the real spirit of volunteerism. I mean, everyone associated with the foundation is a volunteer and does so much to help our community. So I was very, very grateful to all of them for what they did. And I also want to take a moment and thank city staff. The Park and Rec team was just great last night. The police department, fire department, EMS, so you guys were on your games, and you did a great job. And I think you really not only represented yourself very well, but you represented our community very well. So I really want to say thank you. We're very grateful. Next item on the agenda, swearing in of new police officers. And for the first time, I'd like to introduce Chief Carl Waldorf to do the
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. We're very happy to bring before you our two newest officers to be sworn in. Paul DeZovi is a graduate of Lake Forest College and a former offensive lineman with their football team. And Adrian Peoples is an intelligence analyst with the United States Naval Reserve, and we're very happy to have you swear them both in tonight.
Raise your hand and repeat after me. I state your name. Do hereby solemnly swear that I will support and defend the constitutions of the United States and the state of Illinois, and will diligently enforce the laws of the state of Illinois and the city of Lake Forest, and that I will faithfully execute the duties of a police officer to the best of my knowledge and ability. Welcome and congratulations.
Hey, Paul, I should say that we had the president of Lake Forest College come here tonight to tell us what kind of grades you got when you were a student.
And that ends my report. Next item on the agenda, comments by city manager. I've got it.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I will take just a minute to welcome our two new officers, but also say that if you want to leave, now's the time to leave before we get into the balance of the meeting. So we'll take 30 seconds if you need to go in. I think there's coffee and cake and other celebrations going on, so thank you. No offense to the other people on the agenda this evening, so. That completes my report for this evening.
That was quick. Must be the summer.
I know how to clear a room.
You do. Thank you, Bob. Next item on the agenda, comments by council members, the Finance Committee, consideration of the annual appropriation ordinance for FY 2017 and approval of rollovers. Its first reading, presented by Elizabeth Hollab, Finance Director.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council members. The item on your agenda this evening is the FY17 appropriation ordinance, which is the legal mechanism for authorizing spending outlined in the FY17 annual budget previously approved by the City Council. Page 10 of your packet provides a reconciliation between the budget that was approved for FY17 and the appropriation ordinance, because from a format standpoint, there are some differences between the two documents. The appropriation ordinance does include rollovers from FY16. Rollovers are expenditures that were included in the prior year's budget and appropriation ordinance, but for various reasons couldn't be begun or completed by April 30th and now need to be added to FY17 to allow those expenditures to proceed. We do have first reading consideration this evening. Under state statute, it does require a public hearing. That public hearing will be held on July 18th with your consideration of granting final approval of the appropriation ordinance. I will be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Questions for Elizabeth? Mike?
I didn't understand the golf appropriations, because it looked to me like we had employees, money being appropriated for employees, and I thought we no longer have employees.
They are Kemper employees, but they are reported as salaries and benefits. There's also a small portion for administrative salaries of city employees.
Okay.
So we allocate a portion of the Parks and Recreation Director and Chuck Myers to the Golf Course Fund.
Okay. And there's an appropriation for the Route 60 bridge and the Route 60 intersection. It wasn't clear to me which intersection and which bridge.
These are long-standing grant-funded projects where the city is still holding funds related to Fund 314 Route 60 Bridge is when we did preliminary engineering for the widening of Route 60. And 315 is for the grant-funded project related to the intersection of Saunders and Route 60, going into Conway Park. The city has not yet closed out those projects. We're working to do that now. It's primarily due to the fact that IDOT hasn't accepted the projects. But we've been actively involved in working with parties that contributed towards that project to close those funds out and reimburse any remaining dollars to the entities that participated.
And the bridge is the bridge over I-294?
Yes.
Thank you.
Elizabeth, did you say that we provide benefits for the golf course employees?
What we do is we pay for the salaries and benefits of the Kemper employees involved in running the golf course.
Oh, okay, fine. I must have misunderstood.
That's
Okay.
all right. But it is as Kemper employees, not
Yeah, they're
city
Kemper
employees. Right.
That's what I thought. Yeah,
Okay.
Okay.
Anyone else? Anyone from the public here to comment? If not, before I ask for a motion, just to remind everyone, a copy of this ordinance is available to review by the public in the clerk's office. And as Elizabeth mentioned, the public hearing will be conducted on July 18th at the next council meeting. Do I have a motion for approval of the first reading of the ordinance on page 11 and the rollovers?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Roll call, please.
Alderman Waldeck.
Aye.
Alderman Beidler.
Aye.
Alderman Pandeleon.
Aye.
Alderman Newman.
Aye.
Alderman Tack.
Aye.
Alderman Reisner.
Aye.
Alderman Edelman.
Aye.
Alderman Moreno.
Aye.
8 yeas, 0 nay. Motion carries.
Thank you, Betty, very much. Next item on the agenda under Property and Public Lands Committee. Consideration of a recommendation from the Property and Public Lands Committee in support of a resolution directing the sale of surplus property located at 361 East Westminster in the Cultural Corridor, presented by Alderman Reisenberg.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This property was purchased in 1983. It's a strategic property, given its location in the area, which has also redevelopment potential. PPL has been closely monitoring this property as it does with others. And the building, unfortunately, is deteriorating. The roof, other portions of the structure, and the mechanicals are failing. Simultaneously, adjacent properties have recently been purchased by developers, and the submittal of plans for the redevelopment is imminent. Now seems to be the right time for council to formally declare this property as surplus property. If you may recall, in January, we approved looking at this property from a going forward perspective, and it went, the initial part of the process was it went before the Historic Preservation Commission, and they approved the demolition of the building on a 6-0 vote, given the fact that it really has no historical significance, and from a integrity standpoint, and the fact that it's going to need substantial modifications over the years, and it just doesn't seem to make sense to do so. Later this month, the Plan Commission will begin studying the redevelopment potential of the area, considering the highest and best use of the city-owned property. It seems, according to it seems to the PPL and staff, that declaring the property as surplus parcel will send a clear signal to the Plan Commission and potential developers of the council's intention to make this property available to support a high-quality and cohesive redevelopment of the area. Further council review and action will be required prior to the sale of the property. That, of course, would happen later. And the PPL is recommending approval of the resolution, subject to minor, non-substantial revisions as recommended by the city attorney.
Comments or questions for Alderman Reisenberg? Mike?
I never even thought about how we acquired it. I thought we just owned it forever. And in reading the write-up, I see we did buy it in 1983. I'm curious, if it's not inappropriate to ask, what's our 1983 cost basis for this?
I'm not sure I could tell you off the top of my head, but we can go back and look in the records and send something out to all of you.
I'd be curious.
Yeah.
Bob, could you outline the process then and how we'd go about implementing a sale?
Well, there's a couple of different ways, and maybe I'll have the attorney. You might recall the city has a policy for disposition of property. And really, tonight is the first step where the Property and Public Land Committee is recommending to the full council that we determine that this is surplus property and available. It doesn't say what we're going to do with it, how we're going to sell it, or any of those kinds of things. It pretty much just makes a statement of fact, and then that will put in place the next steps going forward in terms of how we study it, and I'll let Vic talk about that.
There are, and the minor technical changes are mine in order to make this flexible enough to go in a different direction if we choose to under the Illinois statutes. But the next step is really to have the Plan Commission look at it and to consider what some of the options are. Obviously, how we go about disposing of this may depend very much on what we envision this property to be used as, and that also may affect both the means by which we try to sell it and the price at which we sell it. So, as Bob said, this was a kickoff measure in order to get that process going, but then it's going to next go to the Plan Commission to offer some insight as to what might be more value-added uses to the city by selling it. And it could go a lot of different ways.
And Vic, then do we then engage an appraiser?
That is an option. It may not be the option we want to take. The more directed we want to be with our conditions on the sale, the less useful an appraisal becomes.
Got it.
And so I think that we may still want to get an appraisal just to have that as a benchmark, but I think at least as this measure is a kickoff start, it's really to put this before the Plan Commission and have some brainstorming about potential uses, and that will then instruct us as to what might then be the next step.
Any other questions?
What became of the tenant that was in that space? Did they relocate elsewhere?
No,
Yeah,
it's
go ahead.
that is the Historical Society. They're
Right.
still there. About approximately sometime in 2015, we gave them about an 18-month extension on their lease. That lease expires at the end of September of this year. And they, of course, are moving into their new location, which is the church, I think the former Christian Scientist Church. They will unfortunately probably have to have an interim move. We could work with them a little bit on this thing, but we're getting down to the short strokes, so to speak, so we don't have a lot of wiggling room here.
Anyone else? Anyone from the public care to comment? If not, I would ask for a motion in support of a resolution declaring the property located at 361 East Westminster as surplus property and directing city staff to take necessary steps in accordance with the council's adopted policy to offer the property for sale. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Roll call, please.
Alderman Waldeck.
Aye.
Alderman Beidler.
Aye.
Alderman Pandeleon.
Aye.
Alderman Newman.
Aye.
Alderman Tack.
Aye.
Alderman Reisenberg.
Aye.
Alderman Edelman.
Aye.
Alderman Moreno.
Aye.
8 yeas, 0 nay. Motion carries.
Thank you, Betty, very much. Next item on the agenda, opportunity for citizens to address the council on non-agenda items. Anyone care to address the council this evening on a non-agenda item? Seeing none, we'll move on. Number 5, items for omnibus vote consideration. There are 2 this evening. As we always do, any member of the council can take them separately. If not, I'll ask for a motion to approve them together. Item number 1, approval of the June 20, 2016 City Council meeting minutes. And item number 2, approval of the check register for the period May 28th to June 24th, 2016. Any member of the council care to take those individually? If not, I'd ask for a motion to approve the omnibus.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Roll call, please.
Alderman Waldeck.
Aye.
Alderman Beidler.
Aye.
Alderman Pandeleon.
Aye.
Alderman Newman.
Aye.
Alderman Tack.
Aye.
Alderman Reisenberg.
Aye.
Alderman Edelman.
Aye.
Alderman Moreno.
Aye.
8 yeas, 0 nay. Motion carries.
Thank you very much. Next item, number 6, ordinances. Tonight, we're consideration of an ordinance amending the City of Lake Forest Liquor Code to increase the number of licenses available in Class C3. And this is first reading and, if desired by the council, final approval. Also this evening presented by Vic Filippini, City Attorney.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. The city has received a request from Chief's Restaurant to have a change in the status of their license, and as a result, this is coming before you. You will note that there are several other licenses that have been changed in the draft ordinance. That's really more cleanup than anything else. Our code has an automatic provision that when a license is either not renewed or is abandoned, that it automatically reduces, but it doesn't show up in the code that way. So we're doing a little bit of catch-up on our published presentation of the number of licenses, as well as making the change to accommodate the request of chiefs.
Any questions for Vic? None? Anyone from the public care to comment? Vic, if we did final, can we do it in one motion, or do we need to?
We certainly can waive and vote on the same one. It would require a supermajority vote of the council to do that.
Then I would ask for consideration of a motion to amend the City of Lake Forest Liquor Code to increase the number of licenses available in Class C3, and I would ask to have the motion include waiving first reading and providing final approval. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Roll call, please.
Alderman Waldeck.
Aye.
Alderman Beidler.
Aye.
Alderman Pandeleon.
Aye.
Alderman Newman.
Aye.
Alderman Tack.
Aye.
Alderman Reisenberg.
Aye.
Alderman Edelman.
Aye.
Alderman Moreno.
Aye.
8 yeas, 0 nay. Motion carries.
Thank you very much, Betty.
A supermajority.
Yes, thanks. Kind of thought that, but just. Next item on the agenda, ordinances affecting code amendments. There are no ordinances this evening affecting code amendments on the agenda. Item number 8, new business. Consideration of a recommendation from the Zoning Board of Appeals in support of an amendment to the special use permit for Lake Forest College as it pertains to Farwell Field and Hallis Hall. First reading, if desired by the City Council. Final approval presented by Catherine Cerniak, Director of Community Development.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. This item does come to you with a unanimous recommendation, 7-0, from the Zoning Board of Appeals. I'd like to briefly cover a few items. I'd like to summarize the request for you. I'd like to review the process to date. I'd like to review the key findings made by the Zoning Board of Appeals, and then summarize the conditions as recommended by the Zoning Board of Appeals. Just to orient you, this is a request for temporary lights on Farwell Field. Farwell Field is located on the south campus of Lake Forest College. It is located north of Illinois Road and west of Washington Road. This field predates the surrounding residential area. As I mentioned, this is a request for temporary lights. The college, unlike other institutions in the community, is not requesting approval of permanent lights on the football field. The request is for lights for a maximum of 3 weeks. Those 3 weeks would begin after the end of daylight savings time in the fall, and the full 3 weeks, 15 weekday evenings, would only be used during the years in which the college teams advance into postseason play. Otherwise, the use would be something less than 3 weeks. The proposed time is from 4 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. Again, although the college teams practice on the field before the end of daylight savings time, once we're in daylight savings time, the lights are needed beginning at 4. The lights would be used for practices only. There would be no games played on the field during that 3-week period. In 2014 and 2015, there was a trial usage of temporary lights on the field. Those experiments did provide useful information both to the college and to the city, as well as allow the opportunity for neighbors to offer input. The plans for the lights, the sighting of the lights was modified throughout the 3-week period last fall. The college experimented with lights in different locations, really taking the opportunity to look at how lights in different positions impacted neighboring homes. There have been various communications with neighbors. The college has held at least 2 and possibly more drop-in sessions. Unfortunately, those drop-in sessions were attended by 1 or 2 or 3 neighbors. The college sent out a number of letters. I know there was some personal contact made. And the city also sent out numerous communications. In February, I believe, of this year, we did send out an initial communication inviting comment from residents as we prepared for Zoning Board of Appeals hearings beginning in March of this year. The Zoning Board of Appeals in 2017 held public hearings both in March and in June. And as I mentioned, you now have before you, as an outcome of that public hearing, a unanimous recommendation before you to approve temporary lighting on the field. 6 temporary lights, 6 portable lights are proposed. The layout of the lights that seems to provide the least impact on neighboring homes results on 4 lights along the southern edge of the field. Illinois Road is down here. A light on each end of the field. It really is a balance between assuring there's enough light on the field to allow for safe practices, while also trying to locate the lights in a way that minimizes the impacts on the homes. I'm going to just, with that picture in mind, just go back to this image where you do see surrounding homes. There is fairly dense landscaping located along Illinois Road. This landscaping actually was a requirement that came out of the special use permit approval in 2003 when a new press box was constructed along with bleachers. There's also a wooded parcel back in this area that is owned by Lake Forest College. There have been some recent plantings along this area, so that college has worked to really maintain a landscape buffer around the field. In the discussions of the zoning board, they certainly recognize that these temporary lights have an impact on neighboring properties. They also realize that at other locations in the community, the Winter Club, the Knollwood Club, Deer Path Park, West Park during the ice skating season, and some other locations, there are actually permanent lights that have been approved by the city. Most recently, I believe you saw the special use permit amendment request from the Winter Club. And in that case, there was a fourth paddle court added, additional lights added, and those lights actually, some nights of the week are approved for use until 10 in the evening. So the zoning board talked through how this request relates, compares or doesn't compare to other requests for lighting that have come before the zoning board and the city council. The zoning board recognized the importance of making sure that the college can continue to meet the needs, changing demands of students, and really to remain on par with other schools that are comparable. Students are looking at many schools these days, not just one or two. So the zoning board recognized that the college is an important part of the character of this neighborhood and really looked for a way to support this very limited use. The zoning board felt that the end product, the end recommendation with the conditions that they are recommending really does do a great deal to mitigate impacts off-site on neighboring properties. The zoning board also recognized that in the past, this field, Farwell Field, has been used by commercial teams. It was used by the Cardinals, by the Chicago Bears, and most recently by the Chicago Fire soccer team. None of those teams use this field anymore. When those teams used the field, there was certainly a higher intensity of use. In some cases, press attended some of those practices, and there was much more activity. None of that occurs any longer, and the proposed lights would only be used by college teams. Again, the lighting plan I talked through a few moments ago. In summary, the zoning board has recommended approval of 6 lights on the field for use up to 3 weeks after daylight savings time, limited hours, 4 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. Again, practices only would occur, no games, so it's not a situation where you'd be bringing in visitors or spectators. There was a concern about music being played at practices. No music will be played during the practices. Music is played as a standard practice during games, but again, no games will occur during this time period. The college has already done some enhancement of landscaping. On a seasonal basis, the city reviews the landscaping, particularly along Illinois Road, and as an earlier requirement of the special use permit, that landscaping is maintained. As trees die, those trees are replaced. The zoning board is recommending that in 2016 that the city, at the cost of the college, bring in a lighting and acoustical consultant, simply to advise both the college and the city as to whether there are ways that impacts could be further mitigated. Could the baffling be used in a different manner? Could the lights slightly be shifted? So the zoning board recognized that we don't necessarily have the best answer. We don't necessarily know the best solution for the layout of the lights, but agreed that it makes sense to bring in an expert to work with us and to make improvements if possible. The light intensity is limited by the conditions of approval. The lights need to be directed downward. The light pole extensions, the light poles will only be extended during the practices and would need to be lowered during the day. As I mentioned, each of the generators at the base of the 6 lights will be fully baffled. Last year, I believe 2 or 3 of the lights were baffled, really as an experiment. The zoning board recommends that in 5 years, giving us a chance to really see how this works. Also recognizing in 5 years conditions might change, but that the city council at that point hear a review of the experiences to date and determine whether any further review of the special use permit or the conditions would be required, and if so, remand that back to the zoning board. And then finally, the zoning board recognized that there is some language in the existing special use permit related to construction of the press box, related to the use of the field by the Chicago Fire. So they're recommending that language be eliminated, so there's no question that the field is no longer available for use by the Chicago Fire or any other commercial team. With that, if you choose to do so, it would be appropriate to waive first reading and grant final approval of the ordinance that was provided to you under separate cover. I would note that the city attorney identified, as he always does, a few language changes that are needed, so they're not substantive, but if you approve that, we would make those changes before it's signed by the mayor. I would be happy to answer any questions. I would also note that President Scott is in the audience this evening with other members of his staff.
Kathy, I have a few questions. I want to ask you a few questions about the consultant, because it's my recollection that this is a new condition that was imposed by the Zoning Board of Appeals. This is a consultant that is paid for by Lake Forest College, and
That's correct.
the consultant is chosen by the city of Lake Forest?
Correct.
Okay. And my second question about the consultant is, in those, the prior incidents that you mentioned of lights being used in other venues. For example, you talked about, I believe, the Winter Club, Norwood Club, there's lights at Lake Forest High School. In any of those situations, was that condition placed upon the venue, or are we really going sort of above and beyond and imposing a condition that we haven't imposed before? Does that make sense?
To my knowledge, a consultant was not brought in on any of those other venues. The zoning board did, after their March meeting, recommend that we talk with a consultant, and city staff actually talked with a number of consultants, and we heard consistently from them that the best way they can give us advice is to actually be on the site. That simply looking at the materials you have in your packet or the specifications for the baffling really wouldn't be as much value as having them visit the site. So it is an unusual condition, but it was directly in response to concerns from the neighbors.
Okay. And just another quick question about the baffling, because it was my recollection, I could be wrong on this, but the baffling that was done last year was a different type of baffling that is envisioned for this year. Am I correct about that, or am
I believe
wrong
it's
about
the same type, but only a couple lights were baffled. The baffling is an investment for the college, so they really wanted to test it out and see if they would receive approval to use the lights on an ongoing basis. So it is the same type of baffling. And last year, the baffling of the lights, what we heard reports from people who were on the field is that in the areas where those generators were baffled, they could actually carry on a conversation.
Thank you.
Okay. I have a couple questions. Yeah. The whole thing is a little baffling. First off, do you want permanent lights? I mean, if you had your druthers, would you just say, we'd like to have real lights with, no need for baffling and, properly constructed? I mean, is that something that you would desire if it was available?
Thanks for the question, Alderman Tack. I think what I can say tonight is all we have ever contemplated is the temporary lights that we're proposing tonight. So we have never really examined the issue of permanent lights and don't have any requests to make of that sort here this evening.
I guess I would ask you why.
Short-sightedness.
Isn't very much.
No, we really we have not considered permanent lights on the field. We have had no need for them. The only time that we really have a need for lights is for this brief, limited 3-week period after daylight savings time to allow practices to continue. The one point I would make in addition, which may be different from, let's say, high schools in the area, is our games are on Saturdays during the day, typically. Or for that matter, soccer games sometimes are in the afternoon, but they are earlier in the season before the issue of lighting becomes apparent. So we really have not identified a need for permanent lighting at the field for the college. So there's, at least as of today, the most complete answer that I could offer.
Okay. The second thing is, just as an observation, and much of my view of the world is informed by Animal House, but it seems like this is, these restrictions are essentially, no fun of any kind. This seems ridiculous to me. the requirements that we put on them, all the studies. I mean, this is a college. Colleges have sporting events. They do these things, and we've got all of these other institutions around town with lights that you know, the Lake Forest Club, the Winter Club, you know, Deer Path Park, you name it, everybody's got it. The high school with the lights, and we're placing such a remarkable burden, I think, on the college for doing something relatively simple, and I don't really get that. I mean, this predates the neighborhood. It's the natural evolution of a college. If you're going to have a college and have college sports, you're going to need permanent lights. I mean, I know you may not be thinking that way, but it's common sense. So at what point in time do we just say, hey, listen, this is the reality of living near a college? Just my observation.
Ernie, I think to that, I mean, I appreciate your comments, and we've talked with President Scott and staff about it. You know, I think this is a decision that was made by staff and the ZBA to look at it in a 5-year window. And I think if the council in the future believes that it wants to review it sooner than that, it certainly can. And if the college believes, after some thought and some more discussion internally, that it wants to consider more permanent lights or something that would be broader, I think we're certainly open to further discussion about it. So,
Could I ask a question in that line?
Yep.
Do you have even the slightest idea what the cost of permanent lights would be compared to doing these temporary lights over an X number of years? I mean, what would the payback be on permanent lights?
The cost would be more. I know
Right.
that much. I really have no estimate. And I guess consistent with the answer that I gave earlier, Alderman, we have not investigated the cost of permanent lights, so I'd really be making a wild guess at this point. I know that it would be substantial, but I don't know.
Okay.
Any other questions, Mike?
Yeah, it's like Alderman Tack read my mind. I mean, you expressed everything I was sitting here wondering myself about the permanent lights and the no music. It is a college, and I know I do cardio tennis, and we blast the music when we do that. But that's for you to determine. But I would encourage you to do a cost-benefit analysis of I don't know if you own the generators and poles or if you lease them, and then there's the diesel or gasoline fuel, but I'd do a cost-benefit analysis and consider 6 poles permanently wired.
And the one point I think about permanent lights, which frankly, I read the whole packet, watched the whole meeting stuff, it hadn't even crossed my mind to suggest it, and I think it's really interesting. I mean, you asked for what you need. That's what you did. You made a reasonable request. You saw that wasn't necessarily appealing to all of your neighbors, although many have supported it, but you asked simply for what you need. But my understanding is that permanent lights wouldn't be noisy. So there is that, you know, this whole baffling thing you're having to, I believe at the meeting you set up to $50,000 to buy, because the baffle is a structure, sort of a folding thing or something that goes around each, you know, not to mention storage. I don't know what that's going to be for 6 of them. We have to buy those. So that's an expenditure that would be used for each of the 5 years around each of the 6 lights. But I don't think most permanent lights have any noise at all, do they? Or that I'd be aware of. So, you know, that would be a non-issue. Anyway, that is presumably not our discussion for tonight unless the president wants it to be.
Right. I mean, if the school's intent is only to use this for 3 weeks, then the cost of permanent lights may be prohibitive in a payback sense.
Yeah.
So it's easy to understand the neighbor's concern. If you put up permanent lights, it could open a Pandora's box of more than 3 weeks, finding other uses for lights.
And I think you hit the nail on the head. I agree with everything everyone's saying about permanent lights, but I think the fear would be amongst the neighbors is that, you know, that would then expand the use of this field at nighttime, which there are houses on Illinois, especially which are very, very close. As it is, I will say I think the college has gone above and beyond. Showing, I can't even call it a spirit of cooperation because it goes so much further than that. And I agree that the conditions that were imposed by the Zoning Board of Appeals were stringent, and they were very diligent, and there were a number of lengthy meetings, and the college responded to those meetings, and they shortened the hours. They changed the configuration of the lights. They said no music during practices. I'm probably leaving a few things out. Agreed to pay a consultant that we choose. Agreed to more baffling. So I think that for a maximum of 3 weeks. And I live in the neighborhood. I'm around the corner, so I got all the letters that were sent by the college. And I walked down the street many times while these lights were in session. And I could say half the time when I walked down there, they weren't there. They weren't on. So I, you know, a maximum of 3 weeks for 3.5 hours a day. And I don't think they used it for half that amount of time last year. So it's pretty minimal request.
I think it's only 15 days. It's limited to the weekdays. So it's not even 3 weeks. So.
It's less than 5% of the days of the year. I mean, this is a very small ask, in my opinion.
I wanted to ask, or make at the risk of prolonging the discussion about the alternatives, instead of doing all this work on baffling, it might be another alternative to put some outlets out there that you could plug into with the temporary lights. It might end up, I don't know, but it might end up being less expensive than the baffling, and you wouldn't have the fuel and all that other stuff to deal with. But that's just a.
I appreciate that idea also, Alderman. Maybe what I can offer to do is, if we're fortunate to gain City Council's approval this evening or in the near future, over the 5-year period that Kathy Cerniak has mentioned, we can look at other options and come back with more information when the time is right. Whether electricity on the field is something to contemplate. Again, I'm sort of out of my element here to say, but happy to look at other possibilities and in due course come back with more information.
I just want to add my appreciation for your level of cooperation here. This is extraordinary for something that seems to me, and I think it sounds like many of my colleagues, a rather small request that has been blown into a big issue, and I think it's been overblown, frankly. So, but thank you for your cooperation in working through it.
No one else on the council? Anyone from the public care to comment this evening? Come forward, sir. If you'd state your name, your address, and we'll give you 3 minutes.
Thanks. My name is Kevin Bry, B-R-Y, and I'm from Oak Park, but I'm representing Locke Walsh, who is unable to be here tonight. He's a resident of Illinois Road across the street. And I do respect the fact that the council, it's obvious from the discussion, has looked at this matter and looked at many or much of the materials. However, my client would urge the council first, and I believe when I say my client that if you've looked at some of the letters and the records, you'd see it's some other people's in the neighborhood's opinion as well. We'd urge the council first not to waive reading and to vote right away tonight for a number of reasons. The neighbors really have not had a chance to look at either the report or the proposed ordinance. I believe the report was not made available till late last week, given that we met with the ZBA earlier in the week, and that of course was a holiday weekend, and I don't believe that the ordinance was available until today. So the neighbors really haven't had a chance to look at it, and I think 30 days, because of the college's efforts and the ZBA and the city's efforts, we're able to have that 30 days review, and we'd encourage you to wait and consider the matter later. I won't go over all of the specific reference to factors that were covered in previous meetings. I've spoken, neighbors have spoken, and they've written letters. But we do feel that in the event the council does consider it should deny the request. Although I respect the opinion that it's a smaller matter and the concerns of the neighbors have been overblown, I respect it. I strongly disagree with it. It's a big deal to some of the people who live within 100 foot or so of the lights. And I think they're entitled to a good faith opinion that they have in their opposition to it. They're entitled also to have this council look at the standards. And we feel that because it is a use that was not previously in use, and that the SUP is introducing a usage that is, we think, injurious to existing use by some of the neighbors, not good for the public or the neighbors, and out of character with the neighborhood as it exists, that particular neighborhood. We think those factors militate against approving it. Finally, we do object to the piggybacking, for lack of a better word, of the what's been termed a condition, when really is not a condition, of changing supposedly outdated language from the 2003 SUP. This was not part of the review process under the special use permit application. It was not disclosed what words were being replaced. The purpose of it was not discussed. And I think that we potentially, at best, muddy the waters to confuse the one that has little to do with the other, that is changing language that has to do with the Chicago Fire using it and putting these lights in. The two really are not related, and we think that at best it would muddy the waters, and at worst it may be introducing an element that is not being properly filed with respect to the special use procedures of public notice and comment and the rest. So I appreciate your willing to let me speak. I appreciate you've all taken a good look at this and hope you'll continue to and use the 30 days to maybe talk to some of the neighbors personally or review some of the other material that you may not have had a chance to. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bry. Kathy, I have one question for you. When did this all start? How long has this been going on?
As I mentioned, there was a trial period for the lights in 2014. In September of 2015, the Plan Commission considered this request, had some concerns, knew the time was short, did forward a recommendation to the City Council that the use of lights be allowed during the fall of 2015 and then a review occur. That review did occur. In fact, the Zoning Board of Appeals held a public hearing in March, and it was continued until June. At both of those public hearings, in fact, the Zoning Board of Appeals had in their packet the current special use permit, and discussed the fact that the Chicago Fire conditions, one of those which said lights cannot be used, but that was specifically under the references to the Chicago Fire. The Zoning Board specifically discussed that those provisions, outdated provisions, should in fact be removed from the ordinance, from the special use ordinance. So this has really been in discussions for almost 2 years. It has been before the Zoning Board since last September. They have held 3 meetings on it. It was before the council last fall, and now back before you.
So a huge amount of opportunity for public comment, a lot of involvement. As you said, there were several special meetings held. Very few residents showed up. So I think, we all up here believe that one of our primary responsibilities is to be fair. And I think in listening to what you just said and hearing what we just heard, I think I would believe that we've given the neighbors and the residents more than an opportunity and tried to be fair. And I believe we looked at it very appropriately. So unless there's any other comments, Alderman Beidler?
I would like to make a comment. I mentioned earlier having read all the materials, which I did, and I did spend several hours today listening in full to the full testimony and presentations at last week's ZBA meeting. It was fascinating, among other things. And this really, as a Ward 1 alderman, this is not an aside at all. Congratulations to the winning teams at the college, and go Foresters. I hope we have more of those. And that's part of the compelling reason that we do this, so that we can reassure future candidates for those winning teams that this ability to practice in the winning season after daylight saving continues. So that's terrific. The one thing that I didn't hear adequately that I would really like to say, and it's something I feel really strongly about, the students who are at Lake Forest College, it's just 4 years, but they are members of our community for the 4 years that they're here. This isn't about them. So it's not the real residents, the real residents of the community versus these interlopers. They are members of the community, and we need to treat them that way. This is community members who have a need. It's certainly a community institution that's been valuable for many, many, many decades, as we know, and the relationship is a valued one, and I think any chance we get to reiterate that, we want to do so. But those kids, those students, when they're here, they are us. They belong here. We have expectations of them. Kathy and I have been dealing with an issue in Ward 1 lately about residents renting off campus, and we are going to be really clear with those students that we have expectations that they behave in their neighborhoods as we expect neighbors to behave, whether they're here for 4 years or 2 years or 40 years. So if we have these expectations of them, then we need to treat them like community members. And I think sometimes we lose that in these conversations about students because we think of them as transitory. And I didn't hear that, and I want to be sure that it's said.
Actually, some of them become city employees, like our
Like,
city manager and this
Our
newly
newest
sworn-in
fireman.
police officer, and, yeah.
I think
Yeah.
the city has given enough time and energy to this issue over the last whatever years, and it's time to move forward and get it behind us.
Unless there's any other comments, I'd then like to ask for a motion to waive first reading and grant final approval of an ordinance amending the special use permit for Lake Forest College as it pertains to Farwell Field and Hallis Hall as recommended by the Zoning Board of Appeals, subject to specific language changes as noted. Do I have a motion?
So
Second.
moved.
Roll call, please.
Alderman Waldeck.
Aye.
Alderman Beidler.
Aye.
Alderman Pandeleon.
Aye.
Alderman Newman.
Aye.
Alderman Tack.
Aye.
Alderman Reisenberg.
Aye.
Alderman Edelman.
Aye.
Alderman Moreno.
Aye.
8 yeas, 0 nay. Motion carries.
I will reiterate Alderman Beidler. Go Foresters. Congratulations. Next item on the agenda, additional items for council discussion. Any additional items this evening?
Could I bring up a couple points? One is the sorry state of fences in Lake Forest. I don't know if you've driven down Deer Path lately. Most people do. The number of fences that are in various states of falling down is remarkable, and it's really a blight. I'm shocked by it. We brought this up before about looking at fence ordinances and how we deal with them, but I think there needs to be some effort to ask or require homeowners to maintain fences on public thoroughfares. Seeing fences that are laying down, completely missing sections, especially on what people like to refer to as a gateway to the city, seems to me to be really inappropriate and very easily remedied. The other pet peeve of mine when I look at fences is that half of them are backwards, meaning the part that's supposed to be facing the neighbors is facing the homeowner who owns the fence. And we never ask them to change them when they update their fences, and I think we ought to think about this. And I know that's incredibly trivial, but every time I drive to work, it drives me nuts. The second thing is I just returned from a trip to Europe and the city of Dubrovnik. So if you haven't been, Dubrovnik is a 1,000-year-old walled city that is a living city. It's on the UNESCO World Heritage List. It's an unbelievable place. And when you go there, there are cafes and restaurants and stores all integrated into this incredibly historic structure. And it made me think about how we view living with history in Lake Forest and how much we fuss about, vibrant businesses and activities disrupting the historic character of our community. And I think we have it wrong. When you go there and you see there isn't a gum wrapper anywhere in this city. The streets shine. Everybody's completely respectful to this. And yet here we don't want to use our history. We don't want to live with our history. We want to sort of protect it to look at from the street. And I just think it's a mistake. And maybe we ought to rethink how we live here. And this goes to the question we have about how do you bring in younger generations. Again, when I was in Dubrovnik, I would go out into the city in the evening, and it was full of people between the ages of 25 and 35 doing what they do. And it was fabulous. If you ever have a chance, go there. But anyway, just an observation.
Thank you, Alderman. Anyone else? If not, I would ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned. Have a good evening.
You ever seen it?